Hello and welcome back to another video about Kingdoms of Arda. Today I'm going to take you through what factions you can expect to see in Kingdoms of Arda. Unlike the faction reviews that will be made for each faction, I won't go too much into detail with each faction, but just sum up the basics so you can get an idea what type of faction this is going to be. After the first release video, I noticed a lot of people seem to misunderstand what that exactly means. So to clarify, the first release is more or less the first version, which will cover some sections of Middle-earth. Later on, the major updates will be the second, third and fourth release. And these will expand into new sections of Middle-earth, which will add new races, factions, quests, lords, etc. To keep track of the factions, I've made this little map to give you a quick overlook. There will likely be some bandit factions not mentioned in this video, but I'll mention them if they are noteworthy. Before we dive into all the factions, I would like to point out the basics. So first off, the teams are locked. So it's basically going to be good versus evil. But in between are something we call neutral factions. These factions are neither good nor evil and could fight either side. So on this map you will see the good factions written with green, evil with red, and neutral with grey. Other than that, there are major factions, minor factions and bandit factions. You can serve the major factions and each one will have a main faction quest you can complete as well. You can become a lord in these factions, and we want to implement a way for the player to become a leader of their own faction that is consistent, fun and low friendly. But I will make a separate video about that when all the details are fully planned out. The minor factions are factions you can't directly serve. You can aid them by fighting their enemies, of course, but directly serving them as a lord or mercenary won't be possible. This is mainly for two reasons. First is balance, as the minor factions are meant as buffer states. The second reason is depth. These factions are going to be very simplistic and unfun to play. They don't come anywhere close to the mechanics we want for the major factions, and we don't want to spend time making sure they work correctly. Lastly, we have the bandit factions, which are factions without any real settlements, but hideouts instead. There will of course be many new types of hideouts, and also hideouts specifically for certain bandit factions. With all that being said, let's jump right into it and start from the south and work our way up north. First we have the southernmost faction of them all, the Corsairs of UMBAR. This faction's troops will be very naval oriented, and therefore the faction will first be added when we add ships to the mod. Whenever that happens, Gondor and other relevant factions will get ships as well. Some of you might think that UMBAR will be somewhat like the AR-DAGOR from the Divide and Conquer submod, but that will not be the case, as that is inaccurate according to the lore. Instead, we will stick to the lore and make the Corsairs their own mix between Haradrim and Black Númenóreans. We might add a few Black Númenórean characters to the faction, but Black Númenóreans as a troop is meant for Mordor. Next we have Harad, the big southern enemy with a vast roster of troops. Harad will have 6 different fiefdoms that each will feel very unique and include unique creatures like half-trolls and the mighty Olafants. We feel that we have come up with a very interesting system that includes the Golden King designed by Games Workshop. This will make the faction feel unique and hopefully lead to interesting gameplay. The Serpent Lord, known from the books, will play a vital role in Harad. The Order of the Hashari will also be featured, but I'll talk more about that in the future Harad faction review. East of Harad lies Khand. Like Harad, the lore for this faction is very vague, but we will do our best to make this faction feel unique and interesting. One of the challenges with this faction is that it lies far away from any good factions it can wage war with. Mordor will hire some of their troops as mercenaries, however, so they will be featured in battles in the west. The troops for Khand will be very cavalry based. We are currently not planning to implement chariots to the mod, but it might be something we look into at a later point. The next faction is Mordor, the land of darkness and home to the Dark Lord. Mordor will be the strongest of the evil factions and play a key role in the evil struggle to dominate Middle-earth. Mordor will mainly focus on Gondor and try and invade from the east through Caer Andros and Osgiliath. Mordor will have a ton of low tier troops it can sacrifice in its wars, but also access to very powerful units like the Olokai, Trolls, the Great Beasts, along with very powerful lords like the Witch King. Mordor will also have a lot of interesting settlements from both the books and films. We will do what we can to make them as accurate to the films as possible, while also trying to make fun and engaging scenes. If you want the full details for this faction, feel free to check out the faction review I've already made for Mordor. Gondor, the Land of Stone. Without doubt the strongest of the kingdoms of men, Gondor will be the faction with most fiefdoms, and it will feature a vast roster of troops from each fiefdom, as well as the regular units we mainly see in the films. They will have access to a lot of high-tier troops, but also many enemies to the east and south. Along the southern coastline, corsairs from UMBAR will land and raid the local villages, and cause trouble for the western lords. To the east, the sons of Denethor, along with other lords, will fiercely defend Ithilien and the ruins of Osgiliath. Rohan, Land of the Horse Lords. Rohan will be a cavalry-focused faction for the good side, and have an advantage on the field, especially against low-tier units that will rout easily. For Rohan, we are introducing the martial system, where 3 lords will have the title of marshal and lead the armies of Rohan. Theoden is corrupted by the magic of Saruman, but can be cured. However, the details for how this will be featured still needs to be fleshed out further. His inactivity as the marshal will affect Rohan's military power. Rohan will of course feature famous locations like Helm's Deep, Erebus and Dunharrow, but players will also get to experience Aldburg, the old capital of Rohan, along with other interesting settlements from the lore. Like Gondor and Mordor, there is already a faction review on my channel if you want to check out the full details for this faction. Next up is Isengard, the home of Saruman the White. Saruman will reside in the Dark Tower of Orthanc and likely play a rather passive role in the defense of this location. However, Isengard will not have traditional fiefdoms like all the other factions. Instead, they will have a legion system, which is basically 5 large armies with a different focus. To name 2 of them, there will be both a Walkrider Legion, which will be led by Sharku, the minor orc character you might remember from the 2 Towers, and another legion will be the Scouts, similar to the units we see fighting at Amon Hen. The Scout Legion will be led by Lurch, as in the films, but if he should die, Ugluk will take over. Each legion will be led by 1 main lord, but he might have minor captains within the legion, which can control sections of the legion, both in battle and on the campaign map. Each legion will likely also have some sort of advantage or bonus on the campaign map. Isengard's main aim will be to destroy Rohan, likely with the aid of Dunland. Later on, when the fellowship mechanic is added, the player will also have the option to bring the ring to Saruman. I will likely talk more about this feature in a future video, but that will likely take some time as the mechanic will not be featured in the first release. West of Isengard lies Dunland, in the shadows of the Misty Mountains. This collection of tribes may seem somewhat united, but there will be a lot of internal conflicts. Dunland will be led by the chieftain of all the tribes called Wolf. Wolf's aim is to keep control over the tribes, as they all share a deep hatred to Rohan. Dunland will be a rather weak and unstable faction, but with the support from Isengard, they will be somewhat secure from Rohan in the early game. Another enemy to Dunland would be the clansmen of ENEDHWAITH, that inhabits the area west of Dunland. The ENTS of FANGORN will be a so-called bandit faction. The main aim is to protect the forest from foreigners, and therefore they might be hostile towards players. There will be some custom hideouts which you can either destroy to end the presence of the ENTS, or there might be quests and lore elements you can explore to earn XP. This also depends on your race and what faction you serve. Treebeard will of course be featured, and there will likely be a quest related to him and getting the aid of the Ents against Isengard. The DRÚEDAIN, also widely known as the Vosses, are wild men inhabiting both the Druid forest in Gondor, but their main homeland is in the area known as the Old Pukil Land. The DRÚEDAIN have a deep hatred to orcs and will kill any that dare enter their lands. In the past, the Rohirrim have been hunting down the DRÚEDAIN for sport, which have caused bad blood between the 2 factions. The DRÚEDAIN will likely have several distinct hideouts that could either be used to learn more about the lore, or destroyed if you want to end their history. The Galadrim of Lothlórien are famous throughout Middle-earth, and most famous is their queen Galadriel. She will of course be featured along with her husband Celeborn. They will both play vital roles in defending the kingdom from both Dol Guldur and the goblins of Moria. The western borders will mainly be defended by Haldir and his brothers. Lothlórien will play a rather defensive role in the early game and do what they can to resist the invading forces from Dol Guldur. Moria, the old home of the dwarves, that now has fallen into shadow and flame, inhabited by vile goblins. This iconic location will be one of our larger scenes, which might be split into several bits, both for performance and speed. The goblins of Moria will have rather low tier units, but the Balrog known as DURIN'S will defend the settlement, and it won't be an easy challenge to defeat. The goblins of Moria will look like the ones we see in the Fellowship of the Ring. While the troops are mainly low tier, they will also have access to cave trolls. The Vales of Anduin is a mix of different people. In the western parts of Mirkwood lives the woodsmen, and in the Vales themselves we have the Bearnings. The Gladdenfields will be a small fiefdom controlled by the Store Hobbits. This is the fiefdom where Smeagol is originally from, and where Deagol found the One Ring. The faction will be led by Bearn's son, Grimbearn, the rule during the War of the Ring. We have discussed to feature skin changes, so some of the Bearning lords might be skin changes, and perhaps even the player, when playing this race, can become a skin changer as well. There's a clear distinction between skin changes and Bearnings, so not all Bearnings are skin changes. This faction will focus a lot on defending the high pass in the Misty Mountains, as well as keeping the main road through Mirkwood clean from foul spiders and orcs. Dol Guldur, the old home of the Necromancer. Dol Guldur is a powerful faction in the region. The main focus will be to destroy Lothlórien and the Woodland realm. The forest of Mirkwood will be infested with giant spiders ready to kill anyone daring to come too close to their territory. The faction leader will be Camul, one of the Nazgul. GOBLIN-TOWN will be a rather small and weak faction that will mainly act defensively. There will be goblins that try and take control of the high pass, and also raiders that venture into the Vales of Anduin and the Vales around Rivendell. Since the Goblin King died in The Hobbit, he won't be featured. Instead, a new character will rule over this faction. The goblins of these factions are meant to look somewhat like the goblins we see in the Hobbit films, but we are intending to add new types of units, so they also have armor on their top tier units. Gundabad, a very powerful orc faction in the north, with Mount Gundabad as its capital, the place where Durin the Deathless awoke. The orcs of Gundabad have taken control over the old dwarven holdings in the Great Mountains and are pushing towards Erebor. This faction will have a large roster of troops and also have access to walk riders and trolls. The main aim for this faction will be to conquer Erebor and harass its free neighbors to the south. The Woodland realm, home of Thranduil. Their faction will feature Legolas as a lord and the faction heir. The elves of the Woodland realm are eager to clear out the forest from wild spiders, and the player can aid them in their struggle to clear out the spider nests. This will decrease the presence of the spiders in Mirkwood. We do have other plans for the spiders, but until they are implemented, we won't mention any other details. Dale, the managed kingdom of the north, ruled by Brand, grandson of Bard the Bowman. This kingdom will be the strongest managed kingdom in the north of Middle-earth. The alliance with Durin's folk and the Woodland realm will be crucial in its survival, as Gundabad will attack from the north, while the Easterlings of RHÚN will come from its southern and eastern borders. North of Dale, we have Erebor, the main dwarven faction, also referred to as Durin's folk. This faction is led by Dane Ironfoot and will of course also include the Iron Hills. While we will use some stuff that we see in the Hobbit films, we will also add new troop types for the dwarves. The dwarves will not have cavalry, as that is inaccurate to the lore stated by Tolkien. They will however have some of the best armor in the game, which will likely compensate for their lack of cavalry units. That being said, dwarf players will have access to ride ponies and also be able to grant them to companions. The mod will feature famous dwarves from The Hobbit that we know are still alive, such as Bombur, Gloin and Dwalin, and possibly some of the others. At the northwestern shores of the inland sea, a small kingdom named DORWINION lies, Famous for its delicious wine, while we are aware that Dominion is a popular faction by some Lord of the Rings fans, it will not be a playable nation. It's simply too small and insignificant to fulfill that role. There are also some that think that this faction is ruled by elves, but that will not be the case. It's ruled by men, much like the ones we know in Dale. Dorwinion will have a hard time defending its borders from the invading Easterlings, so its geographical location will likely play a vital role for players in that area, either fighting the Easterlings or aiding them in their conquest towards Erebor and Dale. LOGAHTAVULD is a small faction between Dale and RHÚN, and its people are Easterlings that decided not to follow Sauron. At the same time, however, they did not oppose him either. LOGAHTAVULD is meant to be a small buffer faction that could be swayed to fight for either good or evil. While not being able to contribute with much of an army, it might be enough to change the course of the war. This faction will mainly have low-tier troops and have very few settlements. EHWATHRUMAVULD is a small managed kingdom that are ancestors to the Rohirrim, mixed with the people of Dale and Dorwinion. While being a faction much focused on cavalry, it's not strong enough to oppose the Easterlings that surrounds most of their borders. This faction will likely be the first to fall to the might of the Easterlings in their expansions into the northern territories. RHÚN, the land of the East and home of the Easterlings. One of the largest factions for evil, and a very important faction that will shape the future of Middle-earth, especially in the east and northeast. The Easterlings are very iconic with their golden armor, and we will use that look from the films a lot when we design troops. We will of course get inspiration from Games Workshop and other Lord of the Rings mods. The Easterlings will have many enemies and send out invading forces to conquer new lands, both in Gondor, Rohan, Dale and Erebor. The clansmen of ENEDHWAITH are fishermen that mainly lives along the shores and rivers of ENEDHWAITH. While not being a very powerful faction, they might still play a role as they are hostile to the men of Dunland. SARALAINN is a small managed kingdom in southern CARDOLAN. Its people are related to both the clansmen and the Dunlendings, but not the Anorians that once lived in the area. They have disputes with the remnants of CARDOLAN and the small orc tribe of AR-DAGOR. AR-DAGOR is a small orc faction in the center of CARDOLAN, landlocked between SARALAINN to the south and the remnants of CARDOLAN around them. These wild orcs are known for raiding into the territories of their neighbors and causing chaos. This faction will only have low-tier troops and not be a major obstacle to defeat. The remnants of CARDOLAN will consist of several small factions led by ambitious lords that want to rule over the entire region. These lords are neither friend nor foe and may switch allegiance as they please. The player has the option to conquer these lands in the name of Aragorn, to expand the DURIN'S influence in the lands once part of Arnor. The Rivermen of Anduin are a small tribal people that lives around the mouth of the Brandywine River. The people live along the shores of the river and are very peaceful people that simply tries to mind their own business. Bree-land will be a small managed faction with Bree as its capital. This iconic location will look as close to the movie version as possible and featured the prancing pony with Barlim and Butterbur. Bree-land will act very defensively and likely not join any wars. The troops for this faction will mainly be low and medium tier troops. The Shire is a peaceful faction full of joyful hobbits that doesn't know about the dangers of the world. The Shire will be led by the mayor of the Shire, but also have other prominent lords like the Thane and Master of Bookland. There are many known characters from both the books and films, and we hope to include as many of them as possible, if not all of them. The Shire will act very defensively and not join any wars, as they don't have an actual standing army. Eventually we will add a fellowship mechanic where Frodo sets off from back end to destroy the One Ring. The remnants of Arthedain will, much like for CARDOLAN, consist of several small factions that fight for power in the region. Some of these might be led by men, while others might be led by orcs. The Rivermen of LOGHTHLÓRIEN is a small bandit faction that lives along the river Lún. These people are rather peaceful and will only be a hindrance to evil players. Lindon is the large elven kingdom led by Círdan the Shipwright. While being a large kingdom, they won't play a very active role in the offensive. The Elves of Lindon will mainly focus on defending their territory. This faction will have some unique ships later on when they are introduced. Eredluin, also more commonly known as the Blue Mountains, are an ancient homeland to dwarves. It's also here where Thorin and his company lived for years before setting out on their quest to reclaim Erebor. While not being a powerful realm like Erebor, it still has several mines and halls where dwarves thrive. The Goblins of Eredluin will be a very small and weak faction in the southern end of Eredluin, causing trouble for the dwarves of Eredluin. Lothlan will be a small bandit faction in the northernmost areas of Forlindon and mainly be a minor annoyance in the area. These people will be inspired by the Easterlings we know from the First Age. The Lossoth clans, also commonly called the Snowmen of Forokill, are a small tribe-like people that lives around the Bay of Forokill. If you have ever read the story about the last king of Arnor, you might be familiar with these people. While not directly aiding in the wars against evil, they will oppose any evil invaders to their lands. The Snowmen will have several hideouts along the coast, which can be destroyed, and thus their people are wiped out of Middle-earth. The Hillmen of Rudar are known as wild barbarians that sided with the Witch King in the past when he ruled over Angmar. Despite not being as numerous and strong as in their past, these men are still no friend to the free people of Middle-earth. They will mainly live in the northernmost parts of Rudar. In their land, wild trolls will spread terror and make sure any invaders think twice before occupying the land. Rivendell is a small elf kingdom ruled by Lord Elrond. Rivendell will not have a lot of armies, but their troops will be high-tier troops and their settlement will have some advantages during a siege. Iconic characters as Arwen, Glorfindel and the Sons of Elrond will be part of this faction and serve their own purpose. The Goblins of Eregion are rebel goblins from Moria that have settled in the old elven ruins of the region. This minor faction might be taken over by Moria diplomatically or by force. If Moria manages to control the region, they'll be stronger than in the early game, and perhaps act more boldly. Elven players also have the option to reconquer these lands and become the Lord of Eregion. Hereafter they can either swear allegiance to Rivendell or Lindon, or even become an independent elven realm. The DURIN'S of the North are led by Chieftain Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Their main purpose is to protect the Shire and Breland from evil invaders, while also trying to reclaim some of the lands they have lost throughout the centuries. The Remnants of Angmar is a medium-sized orc faction. We will introduce Agandar, a character from the War in the North games, who will try and take over power in Angmar. The player has the option to aid him or try and gain power of Angmar themselves. If first Angmar becomes strong enough, they should be able to take over the lands in Arthedain easily, before any strong good faction oppose them, like in the past. The gameplay in Angmar will be different depending what race you are, Orc, Black Númenórean and Hillman. These differences will be more clear whenever we get closer to including Angmar. Agandar will be different in the mod than in the War in the North games, so keep that in mind. We will likely introduce a couple of other characters from this game, but these will be different as well. Especially the use of magic will be removed and some armor pieces might be changed as well. And that wraps it up. Before we end the video, I would like to encourage you all to check out the new playlist for Kingdoms of Arda soundtracks, and also make sure to subscribe to all the channels related to Kingdoms of Arda. If you got questions to some of the faction, or if there's a faction you feel were left out, leave a comment and we will do what we can to answer as fast as possible. Remember to leave a like and subscribe, and also check out the community board on the channel if you want to join quizzes, polls, and get a hint about upcoming videos. Thank you for watching and farewell.